Welcome to the Invincible Innovation Show, the podcast for changemakers. Each week, I talk to the most fascinating entrepreneurs and innovation leaders about innovation, strategy, and design. Hey everyone! Today we're going to talk about the experimental leader, and it sounds like a really interesting topic that we have today. Welcome to Invincible Innovation Live Show. I'm so glad that you're here. I'm Mazor, Kario, product innovation and value creation expert, and I'll be your host. And before I invite our guest, I want to tell you that this is the 100th episode, which is very, I'm so happy with it and very excited. So I'm very happy to have Melanie Parish with me. Hi, Melanie.
Hey, congratulations on 100 episodes. I think it's such a noteworthy accomplishment.
Oh, thank you. I just noticed it like a few days ago, and I said, wow, I'm so happy. So Melanie is a master certified coach, a speaker, and author of the book, The Experimental Leader. And in the beginning, I feel that we have such a good energy. So now it's like a good start where we are. We're live on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook, and you're so invited to join the discussion and ask questions. And now we can start.
Well, so I have a question.
Sure.
What does it mean to you to have 100 episodes?
The first thing that comes to my mind is that I'm a very stubborn person. Like a few years back when I was about, 20, and I went to my mother and I wanted to hear about my childhood, and she would say that I'm so cute and I was like, the cutest girl ever. And I came to her and I said, tell me, mother, how was I as a kid? And she looked at me and said, you are stubborn. So it seems that she was right. It's something that is very prominent in my character. I am stubborn. So that's what comes to my mind. We're live on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Facebook. We said that, and now we can start the conversation. What is the most important skill leaders should master in order to be successful? And I think there is a previous question, which is, how do you see success before we saying what is being successful?
Yeah, I think it's a really great question, and I think that success isn't always. I think, and we can also look at what's leadership. Like, there's all these questions. My husband and I were actually talking about, people in elementary school, and sometimes they get identified as leaders when they're like in grade 3 or something. And really, we were talking about, they're not really doing leadership. They're not leading anyone, number one. And really what they're seeing is they're, gregarious, like they talk a lot, or they boss people around a lot, or they have good ideas, but they're not actually demonstrating leadership. And so when we do that, we when we identify people with those skills, we may actually be identifying skills that aren't the best leadership skills. So we end up with people who are think that leadership is about being bossy or dominant. And the longer that I think about leadership success, the less I think that leadership is about being bossy or dominant. And the more I think it's about vision or having, especially when we think about innovation and leadership, because leading an accounting firm where you do the same thing day in and day out may be all about best practices. But when you're thinking about leading innovation, it's a really different equation. You're trying to do something every day that nobody's ever done before. And it's a really different skill set to help foster. It's like working on the frontier every day. It's like going into the unknown every single day. And I think that that's the skills that you need to go into the unknown are a certain amount of bravery, a certain amount of measurement, so that when you're trying something and it's not working, a certain amount of collaboration and ability to accept feedback, to gather feedback, to hold people accountable, not so much in a heavy-handed way, but in a curious way. Like, hey, you said you were going to do this. What'd you learn? So sort of in a continuous improvement sort of way. And so there's like a Eliyahu Goldratt, who was an Israeli physicist. He talked about management attention being one of the biggest bottlenecks in North American leadership management. And I love that, because it's like, what do we pay attention to as managers and leaders?
Yeah. It reminds me when you're saying that he was an Israeli, most of the words, like you have, English is much more richer. It has more words than Hebrew. But we have a word for attention in Hebrew, and it means where you place your heart. So where you place your heart that's the attention. And when you think about it this way, I think it explains what attention is, especially in the context of a relationship or communication, better than, when we're thinking about focus or cognitive ability, actually.
Can you say that word?
Tzumet lev. Tzumet is where you place, and lev is heart.
I love that. And I think that's really interesting. I think, and I learned this concept, I don't know, in 2013. It's been a really long time, almost a decade. And it's a concept that never gets old for me. This idea of where you place your attention. It's so powerful as a leader to just ask that one question. Where should I place my attention next? Where's the most important place for me to place my attention next? Because you really can only place your attention one place at a time, which is fascinating, and also goes with the whole idea of bottlenecks. And there's only one bottleneck. It's also Goldratt's work. And if you haven't read The Goal, for those of you listening, that's another Goldratt book, and it's fiction, and it's fun, and it's a quick read to learn about how to think about bottlenecks. But these two concepts together, bottlenecks and attention, are fascinating as leaders. And if you just want to scale up your leadership, focus on those two topics this year, and you will transform your leadership.
What's the name of the book?
The Goal. Eliyahu Goldratt. The Goal. And it's a great book. It's an old book. He's been gone a long time. There's nothing new. It's nothing new and innovative, and it's absolutely innovative and earth-shattering.
Yeah. I think that what you said about first understanding that you need to dedicate your attention to some kind of a single goal right now at the present moment. And the second one is that you select to do it, and you're not operated by the circumstances. Or what should you do, or you're selecting what you want to attend to, which is so important. And I think that in many cases in general, and especially when you're working under pressure, or when you're a leader who needs to do decisions, in many cases you're doing what seems to be the most important right now. That seems to me it's more a burning point than it's really what I need to do in the long run or in the strategic point of view.
Yeah, somebody will always fill our to-do list.
That's for sure. Especially if you want to be busy, we would be, right?
Someone will always take care of our to-do list. And if your to-do list isn't full, just let it be known that you have some time on your hands, and someone will fill your to-do list. But
it seems like we're so used to that, right? Yes. To being busy. You have to be all the time busy.
If our to-do list is full, then as leaders, we get to feel important. We become very uncomfortable as leaders if we have space in our to-do, in our time. If our time has gaps, we start to wonder if we're obsolete, or we're not offering value, or I would challenge that idea absolutely. Like, the more gaps you can create in your schedule to ponder what's most important, probably the better leadership you can provide to your organization. Good leadership takes time and gaps and space to contemplate what's most important. And even a moment to think about what the next thing is you should look at, rather than to look at the things that are put in front of you.
Yeah, it seems that this is something that we learn in general in our culture, that in order to, if you're important, you're always busy. And if not, you're not important. And you learn to be very, very busy all the time. It reminds me, I have a conversations with my kids, and one of my kids is 16 and a half. And he told me, all my friends are always busy. They're going to the gym, they're doing some kind of a hobby. They're doing, they're working somewhere. It seems like they're really important. They have stuff to do while I don't have stuff to do. And we talked about what does that mean for you? Is like everybody needs to be busy, and does it mean anything about them if they're busy? And it's a question that you need to ask. It seems like it's obvious that if you're talented, you should use your talent 24/7, and if not, maybe you're not.
Well, absolutely. And there needs to be purpose behind it. Busy for its own sake. Now, ironically, I'm saying this, and I have incredibly busy kids because they're competitive swimmers, but they love it. It's their choice. And it means that their lives, they are running, from mid-September until the end of June, they are running hard. And that's what they've chosen. And it means that they have to really think about how they get all the other things done. And it's not easy. And because we know that we need someone to pay attention to the important things, we invest in tutors, because then the tutors paying attention to calculus and things like that. They're in their last year of high school. So and they know that somebody better pay attention to that. So they're like, hey, we need really good grades this year. We need tutors in calculus and chemistry. Like they'll tell us, because they understand that somebody has to hold the attention to things.
Yeah. So you talk about leaders developing emotional competencies. So why do you think it's so important?
Well, I the longer I work with leadership, and I started this journey about it. I mean, I started leadership 20 years ago and started coaching people 23 years ago. And but the older I get, the more I watch leaders succeed or not succeed or be challenged, the more I feel like they get out of emotional competency. So I feel like understanding people's emotions, the ability to have a theory of mind, to be able to put yourself in someone else's shoes, to understand. I used to think, people went to work and it was just, that's what people did and it was okay. But just if I think about the normal workday for a leader, I think they have imposter syndrome often. They have, when you go through a hiring process for a new person, there's so much emotion on both sides of the table. It's essentially like dating. Like you're extending an offer, you're being offered something, you're having to negotiate. There's a yes, there's a no, there's a maybe, there's a do you like us? Do I like them? And all of that takes emotional risk. And so awareness of that emotional risk as a leader brings so much to the workplace. Just to offer kindness in those processes is so important. Never mind performance evals and bringing emotional competency to that. I think it's just so clear to me now that at every step in the process, people have so much emotion that they bring to work. COVID has amplified that tenfold, if not more. People are on stress leaves or want to be on stress leaves or trying to figure out what to do with children. I've watched people who have had children during the pandemic and trying to figure out daycare and daycares that send children home when they have a sniffle. I cannot imagine. My children are twins. I cannot imagine having us, try to go to work with children who would be sent home randomly on any given day and trying to make it in the workforce. So having compassion with the realities of the workforce, I think, is just so incredibly important right now.
Mm-hmm. So how do you think what is needed from a leader has changed? We talked about the way to understand people and the way to negotiate and to be empathic. So what has changed in the workplace that demand different skills from these leaders?
I think that's a really good question. I mean, some of it's just COVID, like it's just amplified the stakes. I think it's, I think people have been pushed to the limits of their stress tolerance. They are not the same. In my experience, people are not the same as they were 3 years ago, 4 years ago. People were pushed hard at that point, and in some place in their lives, most people have been pushed to a breaking point in some way. And it's not always clear what it is. I see it with my clients. It may just be an increased irritation level. So at the same time that I'm saying we need more emotional competency, I know our leaders also have more frustration. They're less patient. They're more cranky. They've probably put in more hours. They've solved the same problem in different iterations 5 times, and they don't want to solve it one more time. So I think there's been this sort of spinning situation where it's like Groundhog Day, where we've solved COVID and then we solved COVID again, and then we solved COVID again. And so people don't want to solve that problem again. So that's changed. Like, it's almost better to get COVID, like let everybody go get COVID than try to solve the how are we going to distance and how are we going to wear masks and how are we going to send half the people home and nobody wants to do it anymore. Is sort of my experience. It's the cure is worse than in people's minds. So that's the difference. I think the Me Too movement in some workplaces has really upped the stakes for people on how they feel safe or not safe at work. And I think that things are in flux there still and will continue to be in flux about how people grapple with different issues of equity, diversity, and inclusion.
Yeah. So maybe they need more flexibility in the way they see things or the way that they perceive, or it comes to my mind that understanding even the fragility of some of the people that you work with and the fact that they're vulnerable, even if they look very, they're producing the same results, it doesn't mean that they're all fine and everything's fine. And of course, if they're not.
Yeah, I think people aren't fine. They may trash talk on Twitter, but in real life, they're tender. They're really tender, and their hearts break fairly easily. And it may not be the people that I coach, but I do see the trails of people around them. I hear sort of the heartbeat of the organizations they work with, the people in the organizations that they work with. Not so much my clients, but the people they lead, the people that lead them. I hear sort of that fragility. I think fragility is a really great word for where people are in the workplace right now. And I've heard of so many people on stress leaves this year in a way that I'd never heard of people going on stress leaves before this.
Yeah, me too.
It's like all of a sudden everybody's on a stress leave, and if you're not on it, you might want one next month. And
yeah,
like how does that impact the bottom line in an organization? And so it has been really this. So it was the first 2 years everybody was really stressed, and then this last year, stress leave has been sort of the word. And I don't know what it will be next year. I do think I have this feeling that things are returning to normal in terms of consultants kind of going back to work, which in some ways that's good news, not for me personally. My work is mostly individual, but I think organizations need my people to go in and help them and support them.
Yeah.
And so I'm happy to hear that's starting to happen again. I think organizations do need people intervening and talking, and we call it, in systems work, we call it ventilating the system, giving people an outlet to talk. And so I'm happy that seems to be happening.
Yeah. I think that what comes to my mind is that if we're talking about removing the stress, you could say they will be back to have the same performance. So they would be like in their general task, they would do the same as before. But if we're talking about innovation, it reminds me of thinking about creativity and thinking differently. And it seems to me that it needs another kind of energy, or a different amount of energy in order to do that, because this really, you need to really be engaged in what you're doing and not just perform when you're doing that.
There's a wholeness, right? Like to the creativity of innovation. I do art, and mostly I don't do art when I have children. So I have a near 30-year-old daughter, and then I have 12-year-old twin. I mean, I have 17-year-old twins, but when my daughter was 12, I started to do art again, and then I had babies.
Yeah.
And so there's these moments, right? And I sort of picture my art is coming back soon. When my boys go to university. But yeah, there is a wholeness required for that creativity of the wellspring. People need that groundedness. So I do feel like, when I talk about, I keep being, I sort of talk about, on my podcast, I talk a lot about sort of self-care, the human soul is the renewable resource of leadership. And, I've talked a lot about swimming in my pool. I've talked a lot about going camping and being outside, and, and just all the ways that people can think about for self-care. I've wondered if I sound like I'm just on vacation all the time.
You wish.
I wish. I'm not. But it does require sort of that. I do think that people think they can take it kind of out of their bones. And I don't think they can. I think at this point, they've already done that in the last 3 years. And now leaders really do need to figure out how they're going to do renewal on a regular basis. Whether, for me, I know the equation for what I try, and mostly it works. I do massage, I do chiropractic. In Canada, we have this osteopath thing that's like different than the osteopaths in the US. They sort of, I don't know. I always say they move around your organs. I don't know what they do really. But and then I swim in my pool. I swim I swim with the competitive team. I don't swim competitively, but I go and I work out hard, and then I go and camp, and I went to a music festival. All that sounds like just good fun, but it's not like I'm going and boozing, and although that can be good, that can be renewing as well, as long as there's rest. It's this, and sleep. Sometimes leaders are so stressed by their work, they reach for the martini. And I really want them to, sleep and reach for the smoothie, and then, and go for a walk and do the renewing behaviors. So that, because they take their vibrancy for granted, and I don't want them to.
So tell us a bit about the experimental leader.
Sure.
And the first thing that comes to my mind before you start is, maybe when you're saying this experimental leader, it might make some of the leaders unease. It's like you're experimenting when you don't know, right? I'm not experimenting here. I know what I'm doing. I'm not like in a lab, right?
Oh, that's great. I love that. Well, so I wrote the book because there's, a whole body of work, and some of it's just continuous improvement work. And I realized, I love Mike Rother's book, The Toyota Kata, and he talks a lot about experimenting. And it's fantastic. I talk about it in my book. And I realized that and I really love consensus decision making and how people come together to hold things. And I realized there's a real perspective shift in the idea of experimenting. So in an organization, and we've all been in a decision-making room where somebody will pitch an idea, and then that becomes Bob's idea. Well, we're going to go with Bob's idea, and we'll see if it works. But there's a whole different way to hold that sort of thing, because when you go with Bob's idea, what you're essentially doing is performing an experiment. And if you have an experimental culture and you pitch an idea and it becomes the team's idea, and the team decides to go ahead with an experiment, and we forget that Bob brought it to the table, and the team says, well, let's try that experiment with marketing, or let's try that experiment. And how fast can we create a prototype and get data on it to see whether or not it's an experiment we would want to try further? So what could we do in a week to get this out to our factory line? Or can we get it out to our customers to see if they like it? Or can we create a little tiny prototype that we could run as a program to see if it would work before we invest millions? Can we invest $100 and see if we like it? Then we've experimented, and we've done a small bounded experiment that we all own. And we've decided what our next experiment is together. And it's no longer Bob's idea that he lives and dies by. We've all decided just what the next experiment is to try. We've collected data. Bob doesn't know if it's going to work when he pitched it. He just brought an idea to the table. And we don't have to kill Bob if the idea doesn't work. We can keep Bob because Bob might have an idea next week that's good. So the idea of being an experimental leader is to lead the idea of experimentation in organizations, mostly so you get more ideas, not less ideas. Yeah. Because innovative organizations don't want less ideas. We don't want people to live and die by their ideas. And so the experimental leader is a whole body of different concepts and ideas that are designed to hold the concept of leadership for innovation.
Yeah, and I think that in that point of view, you're asking questions and you're checking them out, and you know less. You go into this unknown in a point of view that I don't know. I want to check it out, and you're open-minded to anything you might learn on the way, instead of I know and I'm going to prove to you that I know. It's like, I know that this is the right thing, and that's it. It's like my gut feeling. And
well, my guess is when you went onto this platform for your podcast, you thought, oh, I'm going to try this platform and see if I like it. And then you tried it. And I don't know if you had a time period you were going to try it, but you decided you'd try it. If you had hated it, you would have done it as an experiment, and then you would have tried something else. It was literally an experiment when you did it. We experiment all the time, but we think of it, sometimes we think of our experiments as failures if they don't work. But if we actually think of them as experiments, we don't have to fail all the time. We can actually just experiment and collect data and then make a decision. I did a diet for 2 weeks, the last 2 weeks. On Monday, I got on the scale. I hadn't lost any weight. I hated the diet. Why would I continue it? I didn't fail on the diet. I did it to the letter because I wanted to do a good experiment. Diet wasn't a failure. I wasn't a failure. Nothing happened. I stopped. I tried to solve a problem I didn't have. Blam, done. No more diet.
You see. And it's more forgiving, and that to yourself and to others in that point of view, because it's not like you're wrong or you failed. It's just you tried something and you learned from it.
I tried it. I collected data. The data didn't show me that it was a good thing to continue. So I stopped.
Okay, and we talked about being open-minded, and I think that you're calling it being neutral blank state.
Yeah, so this is more around, in my book, I talk about some reactive leadership styles, and the neutrals, being neutral in leadership is the alternative to being reactive. So when, I think I talked a little bit about this earlier when I was talking about young people who are dominant, perhaps as a natural state. When we look at, we all know somebody who's probably a classic sort of dominant leader, somebody who tells everybody what to do. You go over here. That might be a useful leadership style if you're in the middle of a flood. Hey, grab that sandbag, board up that window, and they boss everyone around because they know exactly what needs to happen. They're an expert. But it doesn't really work in innovation because we don't know what to do. We don't have a path that we're following. So I like to say that we want to be more neutral in our leadership style. That's the goal, is to be more neutral, to be more curious. And it's really just an alternative, because I can't tell people stop doing this reactive style that you do. So some of the reactive styles that I talk about in my book, there's dominant leaders, there's influential leaders. So influential leaders you think that you like them because they're very friendly, but they're also trying to influence you to do what they want. So they're just a friendlier version of the dominant leader.
They're a nice dominant leader.
Yeah, they're super nice, but they're sort of influencing you down the path that they want, which doesn't open up honest, open discourse. They're not.
It sounds like manipulating you to do whatever they want in a nice way.
Yes, and I actually have another one in my book that I call the manipulative leader. That's just a little more Machiavellian in there, like that they actually are doing it intentionally to manipulate you, which is sort of the worst version of the influential leader, that will do it more in a more transparent way, that they do it for their own gain. That's sort of the distinction I made. So an influential leader does it because they actually believe they're doing it for the good of the organization, whereas a manipulative leader does it for their own personal or professional gain.
It reminds me of an article that I read, I think a month ago, and he took the biggest entrepreneurs, Elon Musk, and I think it was Jeff Bezos or whatever, and they said that one of the characteristics that they have is that they're some kind of a sociopath, and they think about themselves as more than others, and they got lots of answers, feedback, and comments to that. And I think that it relates to what you said at the beginning. What is a leader? What is the meaning of a leader? And at first, I think that we have some kind of image of what is a leader. And second, I think that sometimes you need to have some kind of different point of view about yourself in order to position yourself from the beginning as someone who could do something different or to bring something different to the world. And it's like it's demanded of you to be some kind of different in that aspect. What do you think?
Well, I think that's a really interesting question. And I think, like, if you look at Bezos or Elon Musk, you look at them and they're not like other leaders. Like, they're not like the kind of leaders I would be helping, training, mentoring to become, because they probably would never make it in another organization because they've been so entrepreneurial. Like, their skill is entrepreneurial. So they're not the same skill sets. Like, we can't look at them and say that's how you create good leaders to go work in other organizations. So they're not models that we would emulate to go become leaders elsewhere. If you want, I'm not even sure you can emulate them, because each one of them is kind of a one-off that had an idea. And then although Elon Musk seems to have multiple ideas.
Yeah, business too.
Yeah, I mean, they continue
the bookstore now.
And then they hire best talent, and then they get to buy ideas. So,
right.
I mean, they're fascinating. They're less fascinating to me than ordinary people, actually. Personally,
yeah,
I find ordinary people who learn leadership skills like unendingly fascinating. But I do think that that profile is a really different profile than the leader who leads within an organization and within either like a tech startup or a FANG company, or, and each of the FANG companies has a different sort of profile around, who succeeds there and what happens and what kinds of skills they look for and what kinds of skills get them elevated and what kinds of skills they need to survive in each ecosystem.
Yeah. I think it's related again to what we said at the beginning about success. How do people see successful people? So are they a prototype or archetype for success? Are they the leaders that we look up to and say, like, I wish my kids would be the next one of them, or not? So what do we
that's a
expect?
great question, right? Like, who do we want our kids to be?
Yeah.
My kids are so emotionally healthy and normal. Like,
it's not insinuating anything about them,
No, but they're not, they're not. It's interesting because they're doing university applications, and they're just, we've been talking for years now because my husband went to Yale, and we've been talking about are they round or pointy? So round being, are they well-rounded, or are they pointy, like really good at one thing? And the kids that are really good at one thing, they kind of are unbalanced into one specific area. My kids are so balanced, like they're just not pointy at all. They have things they're really good at, but they're really, really round. And it's just funny, they're just so round and grounded that it's hard to get them through a university application to make them look like exciting and interesting because they're so round.
Yeah. And I guess that you had some kind of like helping them grow to be more round, I guess, as their mother.
No, I don't
do you feel that you
that was our goal. We just kind of followed them, like we just kind of helped them do what they wanted to do. Like, I feel like our goal has just been to remove barriers for them, like to find the money. Like, it's just like, we just find the money, we just try to help them not have the financial barriers. Like, I have a son who is applying to Oberlin's Conservatory this year. It's a top music school in the US, in Canada. And he has a really good GPA, and he has, he's been in French immersion, and he's in the IB program, and none of it matters because it all comes down to his audition. So this year we found money for voice lessons because that's the thing he needed.
Yeah, so, I understand.
Yeah, so it's like, all of that is the...
Yeah. In general, I could say that one thing that I know for sure for myself and for my kids is whatever you think that you know and could be relevant for a specific kid in a certain time would not be relevant for him in a month or two or a year, and for another kid. So it's like you don't know anything. It moves so fast. So it's really hard. So we're almost done with time, and I have two more subjects that I want to go through. Okay, and we talked about imposter syndrome, right? So you mentioned that, and that many of the leaders have that. And it was a bit surprising for me because I heard that only in the context of young women starting their career, and they have that. And in my mind, people who would get to a position that they are leading teams or leading company would not have that. So tell me more about that.
It is my experience. I have worked with top leaders that it is ubiquitous. Almost every single person at some point in their career has experienced imposter syndrome of some kind. And you don't get rid of it. You might get rid of it in a certain job at a certain position. And when you're comfortable, it goes away. When you feel like you've got the answers or you feel like you've got the experience. But if you get a new job, it comes right back. It's the, I think of it as the discomfort of growing. If you are growing, you are probably experiencing some kind of imposter syndrome. And I don't think there's anything to do about it other than to know that it's true. If you know that it's normal, if you know that it's that thing that comes back when you're growing, it helps. If you have a coach that you can talk to about it, it's helpful. And if you want to grow a lot in your career, you probably want to have a coach on board for the whole time, because it will come back, and you can either live with a lot of self-doubt or you can have someone who helps you work through those kinds of things. So there's no answer to imposter syndrome. If you are living at the edge of your potential, then you'll feel it, and your growth trajectory, your career trajectory may even be limited by how much tolerance you have to feel it. If you can feel it a lot, you may be able to make more money, to push harder for raises, for promotions, to apply for new jobs. So it's something to make friends with.
Yeah, I totally agree. It reminds me of something that I read, that sometimes people tend not to, apply for a job if they're not like 100% filling all the needed qualifications and skills in the list. And I heard someone saying that if you know that already, it means that it would be boring for you. You're not challenging yourself. You need to take something that you have like 80, 70%. So you have what to learn, to grow into this position. If you're taking all the time things that you're 100%, you're just stuck in the same position and you're not really growing. So for me, it sounds really, really similar to what you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Stretch.
So
stretch.
Yeah. So my last question would be, what is your number one tip for leaders today?
I think that my number one tip for leaders is to think about what you want to have happen in your organization, or if you're leading your own life, you're not yet leading a team. Think about what you want to have happen. Get a really clear vision of what you want to have happen, and paint a picture of it in your mind, and then talk about it to everyone. So if it's your own life, you want to have a new job, you want to have a new life, you want to have, a new love, you want to have a child, whatever it is, paint the picture, talk about it. You don't have to do a lot. It'll happen. You'll start to have things happen. If you want something to happen for your team, start to tell them the dream, paint the picture, start talking about it, start seeding the environment. It might be a year ahead. Start talking about the things you're interested in. Start saying what it is you want to have happen. People will start coming to you for those things. They'll start putting you on those projects. They'll start seeing you as a leader and a thought leader of those ideas. And that will help take your leadership forward.
Sounds good. Okay, I want to thank you for your time. It's been a pleasure talking to you, Melanie.
It's been really
And
fun.
thank
It's so
you. And where
nice.
could people hear more about you and contact you?
Sure. You can find me at melaниeparish.com. If you want to get a free copy of my toxic leader cheat sheet, just send me an email at melanie@experimentalleader.com and we'll send that out to you.
Wow, it sounds good. Send it to me too. I would love to hear that.
Oh, sounds good. We'll send it to you. Yeah, that's great.
Thank you. Thank you. And to all of you change makers out there, thank you for joining us. And if you want to learn more about what I do, go to invincibleinnovation.com, and I'll see you next week with another innovative, insightful talk. See ya. I'm Mazor Kario, and you've been listening to the Invincible Innovation Podcast. Make sure to visit our website, invincibleinnovation.com, where you can learn more about our programs and my book, Innovating Through Chaos. I'll be waiting for you next week in our next episode. Thank you for listening.